It was a warm Saturday morning. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and the trees were full of green leaves that moved gently with the wind. Families were out walking, kids were playing, and birds sang from the trees. It was the kind of day that made people want to be outside. In the middle of this peaceful neighborhood, a young black teenager named Jamal Reed was getting ready to go for a jog. Jamal was 16 years old, tall for his age, and had a calm, serious face. He lived in the neighborhood with his father, Marcus Reed, who had just come back from a Navy event the night before. Jamal's house was neat, quiet, and full of books, medals, and photos from his father's military career. Jamal looked up to his father more than anyone in the world. He wanted to be strong, smart, and respected, just like him. Jamal had big dreams. He wanted to join the college track team one day, maybe even go to the Olympics. So he trained every week. He kept a strict schedule, jogging 3 times a week in the local park and practicing sprinting on weekends. This Saturday was no different. He tied his running shoes, grabbed his phone and earphones, and waved goodbye to his dad. "Don't be late," his father said, smiling. "Just an hour," Jamal replied, already putting in his earphones. He started jogging at a light pace, feeling the fresh air on his face. The park was only a 10-minute run from his house. It had a wide path that circled a small lake, with benches, fountains, and flowers planted all around. People walked their dogs, some old couples sat talking, and kids rode bicycles. Jamal was one of the only teens out jogging that early, but he didn't think much of it. As he jogged through the park, he passed by a few walkers. Some nodded at him politely. Others ignored him completely. He didn't mind either way. He was in the zone. The music in his ears helped him stay focused. He had just finished 2 laps and slowed down near a bench to take a break. He sat down, breathing heavily, and checked his phone. There were a few messages from his friends and one from his dad asking if he was okay. Just across from him, a white woman in her 50s was walking her small dog. She wore sunglasses, a visor, and carried a large handbag. Her dog barked as they walked, but she didn't pay much attention. When she noticed Jamal sitting on the bench, she stopped walking and stared. Jamal didn't notice her at first. He was busy scrolling through his messages. The woman narrowed her eyes. To her, Jamal looked out of place. He was young, black, dressed in athletic clothes and sitting alone. Even though he wasn't doing anything wrong, something in her mind told her that he didn't belong there. She thought he looked suspicious. Maybe he was planning something. Maybe he was waiting for someone to steal from. She told herself she was being careful. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Jamal looked up. He noticed her, looking at him, but he smiled politely and nodded. She didn't smile back. Instead, she turned away and started talking quietly into her phone. "Yes, I'm at the park near Westfield Lake," she said in a low voice. "There's a young man here. Yes, African American, maybe a teenager. He's just sitting there, looking around like he's waiting for something. No, he doesn't seem violent, but he looks suspicious. I think you should send someone to check it out." Jamal had no idea she was calling the police. He stood up, stretched his legs, and walked slowly toward the water fountain to get a drink. Then he sat back down on the bench, wiped his face with a towel, and looked around the park again. It was still peaceful, but the woman had now moved further away and was watching from behind a tree. Her dog barked again. A few more minutes passed. Jamal stood up, ready to jog another lap. Just as he started running again, he noticed flashing lights from the road. A police car slowly pulled up near the edge of the park. Jamal didn't think much of it at first. Police cars often passed through the neighborhood, but this one stopped. The officer stepped out and began walking toward him. Fast. "Hey you! Hold up!" the officer called out. Jamal stopped running. He pulled out his earphones. "Me?" he asked, confused. "Yeah, you. What are you doing here?" Jamal blinked. "I'm just jogging, sir." Do you live around here? Yes, just a few blocks away. I come here all the time. Do you have ID on you? Jamal reached into his pocket and pulled out his school ID. The officer snatched it and looked it over. What are you doing sitting on that bench earlier? I was just resting after a few laps, Jamal replied. He tried to stay calm, just like his dad had taught him. Is something wrong? Got a call about someone acting suspicious. You match the description. Jamal looked confused. I wasn't doing anything. I was just listening to music. People get nervous, the officer said, still holding his ID. You never know these days. From the distance, the white woman stood quietly. She had now put her phone away but kept her eyes on the scene. She didn't come forward. She just watched, arms folded, lips pressed tightly. A few people walking their dogs also noticed. Some slowed down, some took out their phones. One young couple whispered to each other and began recording the interaction. Jamal noticed the phones but didn't say anything. He just wanted to go home. I'd like to call my dad, he said softly. You can do that after we finish here, the officer replied. Jamal's heart beat faster. He didn't want to seem rude, but he also didn't want to stay silent. He had done nothing wrong. All he did was sit on a bench in a public park. Why did he feel like a criminal? He took a breath and slowly took out his phone. The officer watched him carefully, hand near his holster. I'm just calling my dad, Jamal said quickly. He found his dad's name and hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Jamal? Came the deep voice on the other end. Dad, can you come to the park near the lake? A police officer stopped me and... I don't know why. There was a short silence on the line. Stay calm, his father said. I'm coming. Jamal hung up and looked back at the officer. He's on his way, Jamal said, trying to stay strong. The officer crossed his arms. All right, we'll wait. The next few minutes felt like forever. People were now clearly watching. The young couple was still recording. Another jogger passed by and slowed down, eyebrows raised. The woman who called the police had now moved closer, pretending to fix her dog's leash, but really trying to listen to the conversation. Jamal stood there silently. He didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides, just like his dad had always taught him. No sudden movements, no attitude, no talking back. Just stay calm. Inside, though, he felt hurt. Not angry, just confused and sad. Why had this happened? Why had that woman looked at him like that? Why did the officer question him, like he was a threat? All he wanted was to run. Jamal stood quietly, watching the police officer carefully. The man was tall and serious, dressed in a dark uniform that made him look important and powerful. The officer's eyes never left Jamal's face. Jamal could feel his heart beating, faster than before, but he reminded himself to stay calm, just like his father had taught him many times. The park around them was still full of people. Some stopped what they were doing to watch. Others took out their phones and started recording the situation. The white woman who had called the police stayed back, a few steps away with her arms crossed. She looked sure that she had done the right thing, and she wasn't going to apologize or explain herself. Can I see some ID? The officer asked again, his voice firm but polite. Jamal pulled out his wallet and handed over his school ID. It had his photo, his name, and the name of his school. The officer looked at it carefully, then looked back up at Jamal. Do you live around here? The officer asked. Yes, I live just down the street, Jamal said honestly. The officer didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he looked Jamal up and down, as if trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. Why were you sitting on that bench for so long? The officer asked again. Jamal's voice was calm but honest. I was just resting after jogging. I was tired. The officer's eyes narrowed. What were you listening to? Music, Jamal said. Just some songs. The officer seemed a little suspicious but didn't ask more questions about the music. You don't have any weapons or anything illegal on you, do you? The officer asked, his tone a little sharper. No, sir, I don't, the officer sighed, and looked at the woman who had called the police. She was standing there quietly, but she gave a small nod. The officer looked back at Jamal. You understand why we have to check, right? People have been robbed and attacked around here recently. Yes, sir, Jamal said. But I wasn't doing anything wrong. I know that, the officer said, but his voice sounded less friendly now. Jamal felt a mix of emotions. He wanted to explain more but wasn't sure if that would help. He also didn't want to seem disrespectful. He stayed quiet and looked at the ground for a moment. The woman who had called the police suddenly stepped forward. I just think it's strange, she said. A young black man sitting alone in the park, looking around like he's waiting for someone. It made me nervous. Some people nearby heard her and started murmuring. Jamal's face tightened. He didn't want this to turn into a bigger problem, but it already was. The officer looked at the woman, then back at Jamal. All right, we're going to need you to stay here while we figure this out, he said. Jamal felt his stomach drop. Stay here? For how long? Until we can make sure there's no problem. Jamal nodded slowly. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next. The other people in the park watched quietly. Some looked upset. One woman whispered to her friend, "This isn't right." Jamal's phone rang. It was his father calling back. He answered quickly. "Dad, the officer says I have to stay here. I don't know why." "Stay calm, son," Marcus Reed said. "I'm on my way." Jamal looked back at the officer. "My dad's coming." The officer nodded, but his expression didn't change. "Good." Jamal stood still, trying not to move too fast. He felt uncomfortable and scared. He had never been in a situation like this before. He didn't understand why. Just sitting in a park could cause so much trouble. Then, a man in his late 50s wearing a Navy uniform appeared at the park entrance. It was Marcus Reed, Jamal's father. He walked with confidence and calmness. People started whispering, looking at him as he approached. The officer noticed immediately. "Is that your dad?" the officer asked Jamal. "Yes," Jamal said, relief in his voice. Marcus stopped in front of the officer. "Good afternoon, officer. I'm Marcus Reed, commander of the Navy SEALs," he said quietly but firmly. "What seems to be the problem here?" The officer looked surprised and a little nervous. He hadn't expected this. Marcus Reed showed his military ID and uniform with pride. "My son was jogging in the park," Marcus explained, "and someone called the police because they thought he looked suspicious. I want to understand why my son was stopped and questioned." The officer cleared his throat and replied, "There was a report of a suspicious person. We just wanted to check." Marcus looked around at the people who were watching. "My son is not suspicious. He's a hard-working student and athlete. He's training for track season." The officer nodded but didn't say much. Marcus turned to Jamal and smiled reassuringly. "Son, I'm proud of you for staying calm," Marcus said softly. The officer finally handed Jamal back his ID. "Sorry for the inconvenience," he said. Marcus looked at the woman who had called the police. She avoided his eyes and looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I hope this is a lesson that assumptions can be harmful," Marcus said, still calm. The crowd started to disperse. Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him. He knew this wasn't the end, but for now, things were better. As they walked home together, Jamal felt stronger. He had seen how his father stood up for him. He realized that sometimes being calm and respectful was the best way to handle difficult moments. But inside, Jamal also felt sad. He thought about the many young black people who didn't have someone, like his father, to protect them. He wondered how many had been stopped, questioned, or worse, just because of how they looked. That day in the park stayed with Jamal for a long time. It made him want to work harder, to be proud of who he was, and to speak up when he saw unfairness. As Jamal stood in the park, Feeling the weight of the police officer's questions, he could see a dark-colored SUV pull slowly up the road. It was smooth and quiet, moving with purpose. Jamal's heart skipped a beat as the vehicle stopped right near where he was standing. He looked up and saw a man step out, tall, confident, and wearing a sharp navy dress uniform. This was no ordinary visitor. This was Marcus Reed, Jamal's father, the Navy SEAL team chief. Marcus walked toward the officer and his son with a calm and steady pace. People in the park turned their heads, whispering among themselves. Some pulled out their phones to record what was about to happen. The atmosphere grew tense but respectful as Marcus approached. The officer stepped forward, his expression serious but polite. "Sir, can I help you?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, I'm Marcus Reed. I'm here because my son called me. He's been stopped and questioned, and I want to understand why." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his Navy ID badge. It gleamed in the sunlight, commanding attention. The officer looked at it closely, then back at Marcus. "Are you with the Navy?" the officer asked. "Yes, I am a chief and team leader for the Navy SEALs," Marcus said proudly. The officer's eyes showed a flicker of respect and uncertainty. This wasn't an everyday situation for him. Jamal stepped closer to his father, relief spreading across his face. Seeing Marcus in his uniform gave him a sense of protection and pride. Marcus gently put his hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Son, are you okay?" Marcus asked quietly. "I'm fine, Dad," Jamal replied, though he still looked shaken. Marcus turned his attention back to the officer. "I want to know what happened here and why my son was treated this way." The officer took a deep breath. "We received a call from a woman who said a young black man was acting suspicious in the park. We came to check." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the situation but not accepting it blindly. "And what made her think my son was suspicious?" The officer looked away, uncomfortable. "Just a report. We have to respond to every call." Marcus looked around at the people watching the conversation. "My son is a student and athlete. He was jogging and resting, nothing more. It is important to remember that assumptions based on race can be harmful." The officer seemed to consider this for a moment. "I apologize if he was made to feel uncomfortable. That was not our intention." Marcus nodded. "Thank you. But I hope you understand how dangerous it is to profile someone based on appearance alone." Nearby, the woman who had called the police stood silently. She avoided eye contact with Marcus. The crowd noticed and whispered. Some were nodding in agreement with Marcus's words. Marcus looked at his son again. "You handled this very well, Jamal. I'm proud of you." Jamal smiled weakly. "Thanks, Dad." The officer finally handed back Jamal's ID. "You're free to go." Jamal took the ID and breathed a small sigh of relief. As Marcus and Jamal began to walk away, the officer called out softly, "Sir, I'll speak to my supervisor about this incident." Marcus nodded. "Good." The scene began to calm down. People started talking among themselves about what they had witnessed. Many were moved by Marcus's calm but strong presence. His words about fairness and respect echoed in the air. Jamal felt a mixture of emotions. He was proud that his father had stood up for him. He was angry that the incident had happened in the first place, and he was hopeful that maybe, just maybe, things could change. As they left the park, Marcus put his arm around Jamal. "Remember, son, you have to be strong, not just in body but in spirit. Always stand up for yourself with respect and courage." Jamal nodded. He wanted to live by those words. That day in the park was a lesson, not only for Jamal, but for everyone who saw what happened. It was a reminder that courage and dignity could shine through even in difficult moments. And it showed that, sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who use their strength to protect others. The park was quieter now, but the tension still hung in the air. The officer who had stopped Jamal was standing there with his hands in his pockets, clearly uncomfortable. Marcus Reed, the Navy SEAL chief, was calm but serious, his presence filling the space with a quiet authority. Jamal stood beside his father, still catching his breath, his mind racing with everything that had happened. The woman who had called the police was no longer distant. She had slowly moved closer, but instead of confidence, there was now hesitation in her eyes. The moment Marcus spoke, the power of his words and the strength in his presence had made her reconsider. She looked down, biting her lip, unsure of what to say next. Marcus's voice was steady as he spoke. It's important to understand how dangerous it is to make assumptions based on skin color. My son was doing nothing wrong. He was simply jogging and resting in a public park. And yet, someone decided to call the police on him. A murmur spread through the crowd of onlookers who had gathered. Some nodded in agreement, others looked away, embarrassed. A few people whispered to each other, clearly affected by the situation. The officer took a step forward and cleared his throat. I understand, sir. I apologize for any distress caused. We respond to calls to keep the community safe. But I see now how this situation could have been handled differently. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the officer. Thank you. But it's not enough to just apologize. There must be a change in how we see each other. People of color are often unfairly judged and treated with suspicion. It affects not only individuals, but the whole community. The woman who had made the call shifted nervously. Her voice was quiet but sincere when she finally spoke. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just felt scared. I thought I was protecting my family. Marcus looked at her with understanding. Fear is natural, but we must be careful not to let it control our actions. Judging someone by their appearance can cause real harm. It can damage lives and trust. His words were like a gentle lesson. The woman nodded slowly, as if realizing something important. She looked at Jamal and then back at Marcus. I'm sorry. I didn't think about it like that. Jamal's eyes met hers for a moment. He could see the regret in her expression. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a start. The officer spoke again. We will review our procedures to avoid situations like this in the future. It's important for us to serve and protect everyone without bias. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's what I want to hear. The crowd began to disperse slowly, the heavy feeling in the air lifting a little. Jamal felt a strange mix of relief and hope. He realized that this moment was bigger than just him. It was about changing minds and hearts. As they walked away, Marcus placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. Remember, son, courage is not just about strength, but about standing up for what is right, even when it's hard. Jamal nodded, feeling stronger than before. He knew the road ahead would not always be easy, but he was ready to face it, with his father's support and his own determination. That day in the park became a story that many would remember, not just for what happened, but for the change it inspired. It showed how honesty, respect, and courage could bring people together, even after fear and misunderstanding. After the tense moment in the park, life slowly began to settle back to normal for Jamal and his family. But things were never quite the same. The incident had left a deep mark on Jamal's heart and mind. He found himself thinking about that day, many times. The fear, the embarrassment, the relief, and the powerful presence of his father standing up for him. It was a day Jamal knew would change him forever. At school the next day, Jamal noticed that some students had already heard about what happened. Some came up to him with questions or words of encouragement. "Are you okay?" they asked. Others simply nodded or smiled quietly in support. Jamal appreciated the kindness, but he also noticed the sad looks in some eyes. It was clear many of his friends understood that what had happened was not just about him, but about bigger issues. In his history class, the teacher began a lesson about civil rights and justice. Jamal listened closely, remembering how important it was to know the stories of people who had fought for equality before him. He felt proud to be part of that history and inspired to play his own role in the future. At home, Jamal's father, Marcus, sat with him late into the evening, talking openly about what had happened and what it meant. "Son," Marcus said, "this world can sometimes be unfair, and people can judge others without understanding. But we must never lose hope. We must always believe in justice and work for it." Jamal nodded, feeling the weight of his father's words. He wanted to be strong and brave like Marcus, not just in body, but in spirit. The family also spoke with their community leaders and neighbors. Marcus arranged meetings with local police officers to discuss better training on racial bias and fair treatment. He wanted to make sure no other young person in their neighborhood would go through what Jamal did. Slowly but surely, their efforts began to make a difference. Police officers started attending workshops to learn more about respecting all citizens equally. Community groups held events to encourage dialogue and understanding between residents of different backgrounds. Jamal took part in some of these meetings, sharing his experience honestly and bravely. Even the woman who had called the police reached out privately. She apologized again and said she had learned a lot from the conversations that followed. Jamal chose to forgive her, believing that change begins with understanding and compassion. One day, Marcus surprised Jamal by inviting him to visit the Navy base where he worked. Jamal was excited and a little nervous. Seeing the place where his father served so proudly gave him a new sense of respect and admiration. He met some of the sailors and learned about their teamwork and dedication. It made Jamal think about his own future and the kind of man he wanted to become. Through everything, Jamal stayed focused on his studies and sports. He trained harder for track meets, determined to show his best self to the world. He knew that success could break down stereotypes and open doors. At school, a group of students started a club for social justice and equality. Jamal became one of its leaders. Together they planned events, discussions, and community service projects to promote kindness and fairness. The club grew quickly, showing how many young people wanted to make a positive difference. The story of that day in the park spread beyond their neighborhood, reaching local newspapers and community centers. Many people were inspired by Marcus's calm leadership and Jamal's courage. Their story became a symbol of hope, proof that even difficult moments could lead to understanding and change. Jamal often thought about the fear he felt when the police first stopped him, but he also remembered the strength he found in himself and his family. He realized that sometimes challenges help people grow stronger and more determined. He dreamed of a future where no one would be judged by the color of their skin or the clothes they wore. A future where everyone could enjoy a simple day in the park without fear. Jamal knew that this future would take time and effort, but he was ready to be part of that change, to stand up, speak out, and lead with kindness and courage. The story ended not with anger or sadness, but with hope and determination. Jamal and his family had turned a painful moment into a powerful lesson for their community and beyond. And for Jamal, that day in the park was just the beginning of his journey. A journey to become a man who makes a difference in the world.